My name is Claire Morrison, and I wasn't supposed to be at the wedding that day. At least that's what it felt like the moment I stepped into the Grand Oaks ballroom, still pulling my suitcase behind me. I had cut my work trip short, rushed across the country, and walked straight into a celebration where no one seemed to remember I existed. The floral arch was perfect. Candles flickered along every table. Guests laughed over champagne like they were in a movie. But my name wasn't on the seating chart, not at the head table, not anywhere near my sister. A coordinator found my place card tucked behind a tray of shrimp cocktail at a table so far from the bridal party I had to squint to see Emma. I told myself it was a mistake, a last-minute error. But then the photographer kept directing me out of group shots. When I tried to pose beside my sister for one quick photo, Ryan, her fiancé, murmured something to the photographer, and suddenly I was cropped out. I watched them shoot photo after photo, like a glossy magazine spread, and I wasn't even in the background. Emma didn't notice. Or maybe she chose not to. She was glowing in that dress surrounded by people telling her how lucky she was, how perfect Ryan looked in his tailored tux. I smiled. I nodded. I said nothing. That's what you do when it's your little sister's wedding and you're already on thin ice for missing the rehearsal dinner. I stood by the dessert table holding a plate I didn't want, feeling like an intruder in a room I'd helped her dream about for years. I remembered when we used to lie on her bedroom floor, flipping through bridal magazines, ranking dresses, and imagining who would cry first when she walked down the aisle. It used to be our thing. Ours. But now, every part of this day had been polished to perfection, and every trace of me seemed wiped clean. No speech to give, no toast to share, not even a glance from the groom who had always found ways to ignore me, even when I was right in front of him. I used to think I imagined that coldness, that I was just being overprotective. But standing there, pushed to the edges of her wedding like a stranger, I realized something deeper had shifted. I didn't come back just for the ceremony. I came because something had been bothering me for months. A gut feeling I tried to shake, but the more I saw, the harder it became to pretend nothing was wrong. And now, as music swelled and guests clinked their glasses for another toast, I felt it in my chest like a quiet alarm going off. I didn't know what would happen next. I just knew I couldn't stay silent much longer. Emma was born 3 years after me, but we were never just sisters. We were each other's whole world. After our parents died in a car accident when I was 13 and she was 10, it became just the two of us in a too-quiet house with too many empty rooms. Our aunt moved in to take care of us, but it was never the same. Emma started having nightmares, and I'd crawl into bed beside her whispering stories until her breathing slowed. I brushed her hair every morning before school and packed both our lunches even when she didn't like what I made. She used to say I was her shield. She meant it too. In middle school, when a boy made fun of her for wearing mismatched socks, I cornered him behind the cafeteria and made sure he never said another word to her again. I wasn't the warmest kid, but when it came to Emma, I was fire and steel. She was always the soft one. She sang to the dog, she made birthday cards with glitter glue, and saved all the candy wrappers from Halloween because she thought they were too pretty to throw away. When I got my first job at a bookstore, she walked over after school every day just to do her homework next to me, behind the counter. We didn't just grow up together. We built our own little orbit. After high school, I went to Rutgers on scholarship while she stayed close, eventually enrolling in a community college with an art program she loved. Every Sunday, without fail, we met for brunch. Pancakes, coffee, long walks through the city. It was the thread that kept us tied no matter how fast life started to move. Even when I got my first job at the SEC and started climbing the ladder, I made time for her. She was the one constant that kept me grounded. Every promotion, every rough week, every breakup, Emma was there. Sitting on my couch in pajamas, sharing fries and asking questions like, "Do you think mom and dad would be proud of us?" She never needed much, just someone to believe in her. When she landed that marketing job at Halebridge Capital, her eyes lit up like the 4th of July. I was proud, genuinely. She finally felt like she had direction, a place where her creativity mattered. And I supported her even when I started hearing the name Ryan Hale more and more during our brunches. But back then I didn't question anything. Not really. I thought I had time. I thought she would always tell me if something felt off. We used to laugh at how opposite we were. I liked rules, spreadsheets, things that made sense. She liked colors, risk, and dreams with no ceiling. But we met in the middle. Always. I still remember the day she called me after her first heartbreak. She sat on the kitchen floor crying into a carton of mint chocolate chip, and I put on 3 back-to-back rom-coms until she stopped wiping her nose with her sleeve. That's who we were, just the two of us holding each other up when the world felt too heavy. So when things started to change, it didn't happen all at once. It was quiet, gradual. A shift in tone, a skipped brunch, a text answered 2 days later. I blamed work stress distance, but a small voice in me knew something else was shifting. That closeness, the one we fought so hard to protect, was slipping. Still, I held on. I reminded myself that seasons change, that people grow, that maybe love just looks different when you're both adults. But deep down, I missed her. I missed being her person, her voice of reason, her home. And maybe that's why I tried so hard not to see the signs, because admitting something was wrong would mean everything we built might not be enough to protect her anymore. And I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. The first time I met Ryan Hale was at a crowded rooftop bar in Midtown. Emma had been talking about him for weeks, her voice all breathless excitement and soft smiles, so I agreed to meet them for drinks after work. He was already there when I arrived, perfectly put together in a charcoal blazer and designer loafers, holding court with a group of young associates, like he owned the skyline. He stood to shake my hand, his smile sharp and effortless, like he'd practiced it 1,000 times in the mirror. His grip was firm, his eyes confident, and his words slid out smooth as silk. He called me impressive after Emma introduced me, then followed it up with a comment about how regulatory jobs must be stable, if not exciting. I laughed politely, but something about him felt off from the start. He had this polished way of speaking, like he was always aware of how he sounded. He leaned in too close when he talked and glanced around the room, even while pretending to be interested in my answers. Emma, meanwhile, looked like a teenager in love. Her eyes barely left him. She laughed a little louder than usual and kept adjusting her dress like she was afraid of disappointing him. When I asked about their office relationship and whether it had caused issues at work, she brushed it off with a wave and said things were different with him. Ryan didn't flinch. In fact, he leaned back and grinned, like he'd already won the argument. He told me leadership was about recognizing talent wherever it showed up, and that Emma's ideas were some of the best the firm had seen in years. I wanted to believe him, but the way he said it felt rehearsed. Flattering, yes. Genuine, not quite. That night stuck with me more than I wanted it to. I couldn't put my finger on what exactly bothered me. He hadn't done anything overtly rude, hadn't raised his voice, or said anything cruel. But there was a chill beneath his charm, something calculated. I couldn't quite shake. Emma texted me afterward saying she was so happy we'd finally met, and that she hoped I saw what she saw in him. I stared at my screen for a long time before replying. I wanted to say I wasn't sure what I saw, but instead, I told her he seemed impressive. Because sometimes it's easier to lie a little than to be the one who starts a fire too early. It happened faster than I ever imagined. 1 month, Emma was just casually mentioning her boss in passing. 3 months later, she was talking about his weekend place in Montauk and how he made the best wine pairings she'd ever tasted. At first, I told myself it was just infatuation. Everyone gets swept up now and then, especially when someone powerful takes an interest in you. But by the 6th month, they were living together, and by month 7, she called me crying and breathless because he had proposed. She said it with that breathless joy only she could pull off, like she'd just won the lottery. I congratulated her, of course I did, even as my fingers tightened around the phone. When she showed me the ring the next weekend over brunch, it sparkled so brightly, I could barely look at it. I told her it was beautiful. I meant it. I just couldn't shake the feeling that it was all happening too fast. I asked gently if she was sure, if she felt ready. She gave me that soft, wounded look that said I'd already overstepped. She told me Ryan made her feel seen, safe, respected, that he was different. I didn't argue, not because I agreed, but because I could already feel her slipping through my fingers. From that point on, it was like I was watching her life from behind a glass wall. She stopped confiding in me the way she used to. Wedding planning took over every conversation, but I was more of a guest than a sister. I got text updates, not phone calls. My opinion was asked but never considered. I tried harder. I offered to help with logistics, researched venues, even baked sample cupcakes when she said she wasn't sure about catering. But the choices were already made. By Ryan. Always Ryan. He was involved in every detail, every list, every decision. The more involved he got, the further out I seemed to drift. I told myself this was what love looked like now. Maybe this was just what it meant when your little sister became someone's fiancé. Maybe I was the one who needed to adjust. But late at night, lying awake in my apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about the way she used to ask what I thought before she made any big decision, and how now she didn't ask, she just announced. It hurt in a way I didn't have words for, like watching someone decorate a house you used to live in. Beautiful, yes, but no longer yours. It started with a flagged name on a routine screening list. I was reviewing quarterly patterns for firms with rapid asset expansion, a task I'd done hundreds of times. But when I saw the name Halebridge Capital, something in me stilled. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. The algorithm had picked up unusual movement in foreign cash accounts and a discrepancy in fund performance reports that didn't align with their filings. It could have been a coincidence, just another false positive in a system that wasn't perfect, but my gut told me to pay attention. The firm's CEO name was right there, Ryan Hale. I reread it, then clicked through the flags again. It wasn't criminal, not yet, but it wasn't clean either, and it nagged at me in a way I couldn't shake, like a word stuck on the tip of my tongue. I didn't say anything to Emma. Not then. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid, projecting my personal issues into my professional lens. But the next week, I ran into Adam Roth at a compliance event downtown. He had been 2 years ahead of me at Georgetown, and we'd interned together one summer. We caught up casually at first. He asked how things were going at the SEC. I asked where he was working now, and when he said Halbridge Capital, I tried to keep my face neutral. He said he'd been there about 9 months, brought in to restructure parts of their reporting systems. I asked him if he liked it. His smile didn't reach his eyes. He said it was fast-paced, ambitious, kind of intense. Then he paused, glanced around the lobby like he was checking who could hear, and lowered his voice just slightly. He said sometimes things move too fast, that the culture was built on speed and surface-level success. I pressed gently. He hesitated. Then he mentioned something about executive pressure to optimize presentation of data for investors. It wasn't illegal, not exactly, just very aggressive. And sometimes Ryan made changes to reports after final sign-off, saying it was about clarity. I asked if they documented those changes. He looked away. It wasn't a confession. Not technically, but I left that conversation unsettled. It matched too closely with what I'd seen in the flagged report. And while Adam hadn't said anything outright, he'd said enough. I knew that tone, the way people talked when they didn't want to admit what they already knew. That night, I pulled Halebridge's filings again. I looked at them the way I would any potential case, and I saw it. The growth numbers didn't add up. The math was there, but the logic was missing, like someone had stretched the truth just far enough to make it look believable. I knew what I was looking at. Not proof, not yet, but signs. And once you see the signs, it gets harder to look away, even when you want to, even when it involves someone your sister's about to marry. The alert came in while I was reviewing a routine file. It was a small red flag from the internal system at the Securities and Exchange Commission, just a notification at the corner of my screen. But the moment I saw the name Halebridge Capital, I froze. It wasn't the kind of alert that screamed fraud. It was subtle, pattern anomalies, profit spikes that didn't match sector trends, unusual cash movements through secondary accounts. But I'd been doing this long enough to know when a quiet red flag meant more than it let on, and my stomach sank. I clicked through the details, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was coincidence. Maybe another firm with a similar name, maybe a fluke in the algorithm. But the documents matched too closely. Ryan's company, Emma's job, their future, everything tied to those numbers. The system didn't issue verdicts. It raised questions. It pointed toward smoke and left the rest to us. I had seen real fraud cases take months to build. Some ended up being nothing more than clerical sloppiness. Others turned out to be the tip of an iceberg no one saw coming. I stared at the files for a long time. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just kept thinking about Emma. Her voice when she first told me about Ryan, the way she looked at him like he was everything good the world still had to offer. I thought about their save the dates, the flowers she showed me over brunch. I wasn't on the investigative team. I had no authority to dig deeper, but I knew the signs. They weren't conclusive, but they weren't innocent either. And if I asked the wrong questions in the wrong way, it could trigger internal issues I wasn't ready to face. So, I sat there torn. Do I tell her what I've seen? Do I risk destroying the most important day of her life over something I can't even prove yet? Or do I wait, hoping I'm wrong, praying this whole thing is just a false alarm the system will later clear? My training said wait, stay neutral. let the formal process run its course. But my instincts screamed louder. This wasn't just a case anymore. This was Emma. This was my sister. And I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. Still, I said nothing. I shut the file. I logged out. I went home and stood in my living room staring at my phone, hoping for some sign from the universe to tell me what to do. But no sign came. Just silence. And the weight of a decision I wasn't ready to make. The Grand Oaks ballroom looked like something out of a bridal magazine. Cascading white orchids hung from chandeliers. Crystal glasses caught the soft gold light, and a string quartet played near the windows, as if the whole scene had been designed for a movie ending. But as I stood there in my bridesmaid dress, clutching a program with my name nowhere near the bridal party listing, all I could feel was the cold. The photographer was already working through group shots when I arrived. I tried to stand next to Emma, thinking we'd at least get one sister photo before the ceremony. But Ryan stepped in, smoothly said something low to the photographer, and the next moment I was being repositioned behind someone taller or cut out of the frame entirely. I kept telling myself not to make a scene. This was her day. But it became harder to hold that line with every passing minute. My seat at the ceremony wasn't near family. It wasn't even on the same side of the aisle. I asked the coordinator if there'd been a mistake, and she gave me an apologetic smile like she didn't want to say what we both knew. Ryan's mother barely looked at me as she walked past, her expression unreadable beneath perfect makeup. Ryan's cousin, who I'd met once at a holiday dinner, greeted me like I was a guest from the office. Even the flower girls knew where to stand. I didn't. By the time we got to the cocktail hour, I had lost count of how many times I'd been overlooked. The place card at my table said, "Guest of the bride's family." Guest, not sister, not maid of honor. Just a generic tag at a table tucked near the kitchen doors. I wandered toward the bar, needing air more than a drink. That's when I felt a tap on my arm and turned to see Adam. He looked out of place in his tux hair, slightly messy eyes, sharper than usual. He didn't say much, just handed me a folded piece of paper and nodded toward the hallway. The message was simple. Check your email. Urgent. SEC level urgent. I opened my phone in the corner of the room, hiding behind a pillar draped in white fabric. There it was. A shared folder from Adam's burner account. Internal financial documents, spreadsheets, emails that didn't belong in public hands. It was exactly what I had feared. Real numbers, real manipulation, real risk. My hands trembled as I scrolled. Offshore accounts, fabricated performance reports, client data misaligned with reporting. It was too detailed to be fake, too damning to be dismissed. Outside guests were toasting the happy couple. Inside me, everything cracked. I looked up and saw Ryan laughing with a group of investors, his hand resting on Emma's lower back like he owned the moment. She looked radiant. She looked safe. But now I knew better. I knew what he was hiding behind that perfect suit and polished smile. The string quartet began playing the entrance song for dinner. The room shimmered with candlelight and champagne. But under all that warmth, I felt it. Ice, thin and stretching beneath every perfect detail. I wasn't just angry, I was done waiting. Ryan stood at the head table, swirling his champagne like he owned the world. His voice carried across the ballroom, smooth and rehearsed, full of praise for Emma and their beautiful future. But then it shifted just slightly, and I felt it before I heard it. He started talking about hard work, success, and how some people spend their lives checking boxes, but never truly build anything. His eyes flicked toward me like a blade catching the light. The laughter that followed was polite but uneasy. Then came the line that snapped something inside me. He said some people are just born to observe while others create real value, that there's always one bitter voice in the room who mistakes caution for wisdom. The room went quiet. I felt 200 pairs of eyes glance my way. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor, loud in the sudden silence. I didn't plan it. I didn't rehearse it. I just knew I couldn't let him rewrite the truth in front of everyone who mattered to Emma. My voice didn't shake. It was calm, steady, almost too calm. I said I worked for the Securities and Exchange Commission. I said Ryan's company was under active investigation. I said I had evidence in my phone, falsified reports, offshore transfers, internal emails from his partner. I said the investigation would begin at 9 a.m. the next morning. For a heartbeat, the room didn't breathe. Ryan froze with his glass midair. Emma turned slowly, confusion clouding her face. Across the room, I saw Adam stand pale and tense, ready to back me up if I needed it. The guests looked from me to Ryan, waiting for someone to say it was a joke. But no one did. Ryan's voice cracked when he finally spoke. He said I was lying, that I was jealous, that I'd always resented his success, but his face had drained of color. He didn't look angry, he looked terrified. I said his own analyst had submitted the files. I pointed to Adam without naming him. I said I hadn't wanted to ruin this day. I said I tried to stay silent. I tried to protect Emma, but sometimes silence is more dangerous than truth. Emma was shaking now, her eyes locked onto mine. I saw the trust breaking the walls crumbling behind her eyes. She asked Ryan if what I said was true. He didn't answer. Around us, the room started shifting. Guests began whispering, phones lit up. Someone was already Googling Ryan's company name. His mother rose from her seat trying to speak, but no one was listening. Not to her. Not anymore. Ryan turned to me with something ugly in his eyes. He told me I'd regret this, that I'd destroyed everything. I didn't flinch. I told him the only thing I destroyed was his illusion. The truth was already on its way. Whether I said it aloud or not, it was coming. Emma looked like she couldn't breathe. Then she stepped back from him. Just one small step, but it was everything. And that was when the ballroom broke apart. The room was still spinning when the agents led Ryan through the side exit. His face had drained of all color, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, like he still believed he could talk his way out of this. No one clapped. No one spoke. The music had stopped long ago, and the silence hung heavier than any verdict. I didn't move. My hands trembled slightly as I held my clutch, the weight of my phone still warm from the evidence I'd handed off. I couldn't look at Emma. Not yet. I didn't know what I'd see in her face. When I finally did, it felt like staring at someone I used to know. She wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. She just looked stunned, like her brain was lagging behind reality. Her lipstick was smudged. Her veil had slipped. She looked less like a bride and more like a girl who had been thrown into a spotlight she never asked for. I took a step toward her, but she didn't move. Her eyes locked on mine, and for a moment there was nothing in them. No anger, no gratitude, just a wall. I said her name soft and unsure, like if I spoke too loud she might shatter. She finally blinked. Then her voice came thin and quiet, like she was talking to herself. "You could have told me sooner." I swallowed hard. I wanted to. I tried. But she shook her head before I could finish. She asked how long I'd known. I told her not long. A few weeks. But the truth was, time didn't matter. Not to her. She'd built a life around someone who never existed. I had pulled the thread and watched her world unravel in front of everyone she loved. She turned away from me. People were still staring, some with pity, others with curiosity, a few already whispering into phones. The spotlight was brutal. I reached out to touch her arm, but she pulled back like I'd burned her. I didn't expect her to forgive me. Not then. Maybe not ever. The truth had saved her from one kind of disaster and dropped her into another. She had walked down the aisle hoping for forever and walked out of that ballroom with nothing but a scandal and a fractured heart. As she disappeared into the bridal suite, I stood alone. No one clapped. No one spoke. There was no victory in it, just wreckage. And in that silence, I realized that doing the right thing doesn't always feel like winning. Sometimes it feels like losing everything at once. The headlines came fast and loud. Financial blogs, business news, even gossip sites got hold of it. Everyone had a different version, but they all used the same phrase: wedding day whistleblower. I became a symbol before I had time to catch my breath. My phone never stopped buzzing. Calls from reporters, emails from colleagues, DMs from strangers. Some called me brave, some called me bitter, some just wanted the full story, like I owed it to them, because they watched a clip online. The video of my speech at the reception hit 1 million views in 2 days. Emma disappeared. She shut off her phone, deleted her socials, and moved out of their apartment without telling anyone where she went. I didn't blame her. If I could have vanished, I might have done the same. But I still had a job to report to and a storm of questions I couldn't answer without crossing legal lines. No one talked about how lonely it felt. Everyone saw the moment I stood up. No one saw what came after. The guilt, the silence, the ache of knowing Emma wasn't speaking to me, that she may never speak to me again. I walked into work and people stared. Some nodded, others avoided eye contact like I was radioactive. My supervisor told me to keep my distance from the case, which I understood. Conflict of interest, but it still felt like being cut off from the one thing that had always made sense in my life. Family wasn't much better. Our aunt left me a voicemail saying she didn't understand why I had to make a spectacle out of something that could have been handled privately. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years sent passive messages asking if I was okay, but their tone made it clear they just wanted an explanation to pass around. I missed Emma, more than I expected. Every day I wanted to call her to explain to ask if she was safe, but I didn't know if she would pick up or if hearing my voice would only hurt her more. So I waited, hoping that time would do what I couldn't, hoping that someday she would understand that I hadn't wanted any of this, that I had stood up in that ballroom not because I wanted to ruin her wedding, but because I couldn't bear to let her spend her life with a lie. And then I'd sit on my couch at night scrolling through news articles that quoted people who had never met me, all while the person who mattered most stayed silent. 3 months had passed since the wedding that never really became a marriage. The leaves in Boston had started to turn, and the air carried that crisp kind of quiet that makes everything feel a little more honest. I was sitting at our old brunch spot, the same corner table we used to claim every Sunday, when Emma walked in. She looked different. Not broken, not bitter, just quieter somehow, like a version of herself that had shed the parts built for someone else's approval. She sat down across from me without saying anything at first, just smiled, the kind that trembles a little before it settles. I poured her coffee the way I always used to, 2 creams, 1 sugar. She watched my hands and said I still did it exactly right. Then she looked at me, really looked at me, and said she was sorry, not just for the way she pushed me away or for not listening. She said she was sorry for forgetting who we were to each other. I didn't cry. Not then. I just nodded and told her I was glad she was here, that I had missed her more than I could admit out loud. We didn't rehash everything. We didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't filled with blame anymore. It was just space we both had to walk through. She told me the annulment had gone through, that she was legally free from Ryan and emotionally still finding her way out. I asked her if she was okay. She said not yet, but better. Then she reached across the table and took my hand like we were 16 again, hiding from the world behind coffee cups and pancakes. She thanked me for saying something when she couldn't, for risking everything just to pull her out before it was too late. I told her I almost didn't, that I was scared she'd never forgive me. She said she didn't, not at first. She hated me for a while, but the truth has this way of sitting quietly in the room until you finally face it. We talked for 2 hours, about nothing, about everything. She told me she was working with a nonprofit now, doing brand communications for causes she actually believed in. She said she was sleeping again, smiling without pretending, and that for the first time in years, she felt like herself. I watched her tell me all of this and felt something inside me soften. Not relief exactly, just release. Like I'd been holding my breath for months and finally remembered how to exhale. When we stood to leave, she hugged me the way she used to, tight and long and real. She whispered that she was proud of me, that no one else could have done what I did. I told her she would have if it had been me. She didn't argue. She just held on. As I walked home that afternoon, leaves crunching beneath my boots, I realized we were different now. Not just older, not just bruised, but stronger. Because we had come through the fire and still found each other on the other side. And that was more than I could have hoped for. 3 months after the wedding, Emma started again. Not with a new job or a rebound relationship, but with something entirely her own. She called it Brightmark, a marketing consultancy, focused on ethical branding and corporate transparency. It was nothing like the sleek, high-rise world she'd left behind. She worked from a small rented office with secondhand furniture and a printer that jammed every other day. But there was pride in her voice when she talked about it, and a calm I hadn't heard in her for years. She asked me to help with the compliance side. At first I thought she just needed support, someone to proofread or offer structure. But she meant real partnership. She wanted to build something with me, not just for herself. I agreed, even though part of me hesitated. We had just started rebuilding what we nearly lost. Mixing business into that felt risky. But she looked me in the eye and said she trusted me, not just as her sister, but as someone who had stood up when it mattered. We started small, 2 clients, a nonprofit, and a family-run startup. Emma handled storytelling and branding. I reviewed contracts, advised on disclosures, and made sure no one ever had to face what she did again. We made a good team. Some days were slow, some weeks were hard, but every time I saw her step into a meeting with quiet confidence, I remembered how far she'd come. She no longer flinched when someone asked about her past. She answered with honesty and a clarity that made people listen. We didn't talk about Ryan much. There wasn't a need. He became a chapter we both chose to close not out of denial, but out of clarity. The lessons were there. They just didn't define us anymore. Emma said once that losing everything stripped away the noise. It forced her to figure out what actually mattered. She wanted to help other people see through the gloss and get back to truth. I couldn't have put it better myself. We meet every Friday now, not just as coworkers, but as sisters again. We drink too much coffee, argue over logo colors, and laugh until our faces hurt. There's still healing to do, but in between the chaos, there's joy. Starting over didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing to keep going with eyes wide open. Emma built a business on integrity because she lived through what happens when it's missing. And I stood beside her not just as backup, but as someone who finally saw what love looked like when it came from truth. Brightmark is growing. We're not the biggest name in town, but clients come to us because they know we don't fake anything. We tell hard truths kindly. We help good people stay that way. And maybe in the end, that's what mattered most. Not the fall, but what we did with the pieces. Looking back now, I still ask myself if I would do it the same way again. If I knew how much it would hurt her. If I understood just how long it would take to rebuild the trust we lost that night. And the answer is yes. I would still speak up. Because silence wouldn't have protected her. It would have only delayed the damage, let it grow behind a curtain of good intentions. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel heroic. Sometimes it feels like betrayal, even when your heart is in the right place. I didn't want to be the one to ruin her wedding. I wanted to watch her dance to see her smile like she used to when we were kids. But I also knew what would happen if I didn't say something. I knew what it meant to carry a truth too big to ignore. There's a kind of loneliness that comes with doing what's right, especially when no one thanks you for it. Especially when it costs you the one person you were trying to protect. But slowly over time, healing finds its way back. Sometimes in quiet conversations, sometimes in a shared coffee after months of silence. Emma and I still have a long way to go, but we're walking it together now, not because we forgot what happened, but because we both understand that love sometimes asks us to choose truth over comfort. So I want to ask you something. If it were your sister, your best friend, your child, and you had the chance to stop them from walking into a lie, would you speak up? Would you risk the anger, the silence, the break, just to tell them what they didn't want to hear? I hope you'll share your thoughts with me. I'd love to know what you would have done. If you've ever had to make that choice, or if you've been on the other side of it, I hope you'll tell your story. Because sometimes hearing someone else's truth is the one thing that helps us feel less alone in our own. And if this story meant something to you, I'd be honored if you shared it with someone who needs to hear that they're not wrong for speaking up, or that they're not broken for hurting after the truth came out. Thank you for being here, for listening, for holding space for this kind of honesty, the kind that doesn't always feel good but always tries to do good.